Living in northeastern Oregon, I had the Blue Ridge Mountains practically in my backyard. As an avid hunter, I was eager to explore the terrain before the next season. I've always had a knack for tracking animals, and I knew that if I wanted to avoid the weekend hunters and casual outdoorsmen, I had to go deep, far beyond the easily accessible spots near public roads. The more secluded, the better. Being in the wild was second nature to me. I grew up on a ranch in Wyoming, where I spent most of my time outside tending livestock and learning the land. From a young age, I learned to mimic animal sounds, tricking coyotes into thinking I was a wounded rabbit. By the time I was 10, I could imitate everything from small rodents to bull elk. I'm not saying this to brag, just setting the stage. I know animal calls. I understand their rhythm, their tone, and I can tell the difference between a bird and a mammal just by the texture of its sound. But what I heard that night was neither. Late one afternoon, I set out into the mountains. I got a later start than planned, but I wasn't too worried. Most animal activity happens at dawn and dusk. I only needed a few miles between me and the nearest road. I climbed a ridge and found a small, fairly flat spot with a good vantage point for spotting wildlife. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I had only seen a couple of mule deer. That night, I decided to keep my camp simple, no fire, just my bivy sack and an early start in the morning. I was exhausted but couldn't shake a sense of unease. The mountains felt different at night, too silent. Then, around 1 a.m., I woke up in agony. A piercing, pulsating headache tore through my skull. Came in waves, a surge of pain, a brief moment of relief, then another wave crashing down. I was always careful about staying hydrated on hikes, so I knew dehydration wasn't the issue. Lying in my bivy sack, I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to endure it. That's when I noticed something else. A faint noise. A deep, hollow sound echoed down the mountainside above me. I froze, the headache momentarily forgotten. It wasn't an animal call, but it was big. I could tell by the way it resonated. Definitely a large mammal. But the pattern, it was too loud, too steady, too deliberate. I tried to convince myself it was just some unfamiliar bird native to Oregon, something I hadn't encountered in Wyoming. But even as I forced myself to believe that, my instincts screamed otherwise. The longer I listened, the more unsettling it became. The call wasn't moving. It stayed in the same spot, repeating over and over, reverberating across the mountainside. And it was too close. By 2 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. The pounding in my head was unbearable, and the sound was driving me insane. I made a split-second decision, pack up and get out. The path I had hiked in on was rough and steep, but I recalled a gated road just above my camp. It looped back to the main road where my truck was parked. It was a longer route, but easier to navigate in the dark. The only problem? It would take me straight toward the source of the sound. I had no choice. I had to take that road. And the call followed me. I could hear it shadowing me, keeping pace, always about 200 or 300 yards up the slope. No matter how fast I walked, it stayed there, matching my speed. Every snapped twig, every rustling leaf sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my body. The call never wavered, never faded. It was always there, just out of sight. I could feel it now, watching, hunting. I gripped my rifle tight, my finger brushing the trigger. But what terrified me most was that I couldn't see it. Whatever it was staying hidden on purpose. And that scared me more than anything. My headache worsened as I followed the road. My breathing became ragged. My vision blurred. My balance wavered. Maybe it was altitude sickness, but something wasn't right. I stumbled through the dark, the sound above me growing fainter as I descended. And the moment I dropped below the tree line, something changed. The headache stopped, instantly, as if whatever had its grip on me had finally let go. But the feeling of being watched never disappeared. I reached my truck just before dawn, drained and shaken. My body was weak, but my mind raced. When I got home, I was still rattled. Couldn't let it go. I spent hours online trying to find a match for the sound I had heard. Bird calls, animal calls, anything that could explain it. But nothing fit. Then, almost by accident, I searched for Bigfoot sounds. And there it was, the exact same call. My blood went cold as I listened to the recording. That same dread I had felt in the mountains crept over me again. But here's the thing, I don't believe in Bigfoot. Never have. And yet I know what I heard, and I've never heard it again. Even on return trips to the same area, I walked through the thick, tangled brush where the sound had come from. But there was nothing. It was gone. Or maybe it was watching. Since that night, I've never hunted that deep in the mountains alone. Because whatever was up there that night, it wasn't an animal. And it wasn't human. But it was there. It was following me, waiting. And I don't think it planned on letting me leave. Surrounded by endless hills and thick woods, camping was almost a weekly tradition, even in winter. The forest felt like a second home to me, until one night changed that forever. It happened when my buddy and I split off from our usual group of teens, aged 15 to 18. We wanted a better fishing spot about a mile away near a secluded stream, where the fish practically jumped onto the hook. Since our group had only brought one tent, we built a lean-to against a massive rock in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was the perfect spot, quiet and peaceful. Maybe too peaceful. Night fell quickly. The fire crackled softly, and the wind murmured through the branches, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. My friend had already dozed off, curled up in his sleeping bag near the glowing embers, but I couldn't relax. Something felt off. I threw another log into the flames and scanned the tree line, trying to shake the unease creeping over me. The fire popped, sending tiny sparks dancing into the dark, and that's when I saw him. A man stood at the far edge of the clearing, about 70 yards away, perfectly still. The moonlight bathed him in a cold glow, but I couldn't make out his face, just a dark outline. But he was watching us. My stomach dropped. I stared at him for what felt like forever, my mind racing for answers. A lost hiker? A hunter? But it was too late for either of those, and he wasn't moving. He just stood there, observing. I didn't want to wake my friend and panic him, so I kept my eyes locked on the figure while feeding the fire. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, the man turned and slipped soundlessly into the trees. I told myself he was just passing through, but I never fell asleep. I lay there, listening to the fire crackle, the wind shift through the leaves, until I heard it. A footstep. My heart slammed against my ribs. Another step. Closer. I nudged my friend awake. He groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Still groggy, he blinked at me, but something in my face must have registered. He sat up just as another crunch sounded, nearer this time. The noise circled the clearing, slow and deliberate. We grabbed our flashlights and aimed them toward the sound. The beams sliced through the darkness, revealing nothing. "Maybe a deer?" my friend muttered, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. We tried to settle back down, but the noises kept creeping closer. Then something brushed against the branches. A soft, rustling whisper. Something or someone was out there. At some point, exhaustion must have won because I drifted off. But then I woke to a sound that sent ice through my veins. A zipper. I bolted upright, and so did my friend. His eyes were wide with fear, but it wasn't a zipper at all. It was a slice. The blade cut through the fabric of our shelter. My fingers dug into his arm as we locked eyes. Then I yelled, "Run!" No time to think. I grabbed my knife and tore open the flap. My friend was right behind me as we sprinted into the forest, barefoot, branches slashing at our skin. "Don't stop!" I gasped, barely louder than a whisper. Behind us, footsteps, fast, heavy. Someone was chasing us. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. The forest twisted around us, the moon casting long, shifting shadows. A branch snapped too close, but we didn't look back. My feet, raw and numb from the cold, barely registered the pain. The only thing that mattered was getting away. We ran until the footsteps stopped, but we didn't. Blinded by fear, we kept moving, lost in the dark. Every rustling leaf, every snapping twig made our hearts hammer. Eventually, we collapsed, too exhausted to continue. As the first light of dawn stretched through the trees, we forced ourselves up. "We need to find the road," my friend whispered, but everything looked the same. By pure luck, as the sun climbed higher, we stumbled onto a trail. The golden morning light felt unreal after the terror of the night. But even in daylight, the woods felt wrong. Neither of us spoke much on the walk back to camp. When we arrived, our lean-to was destroyed. The fabric had been shredded, our belongings tossed everywhere. Some of it still smoldered in the embers of the fire. We packed what little was left and left for good. We never spoke about it. Who would believe us? But we never camped again, because out there, somewhere, that man, whoever he was, might still be watching. Being outside wasn't really an option. It was privately owned, which basically meant we didn't have the money to pay anyone to help. So my parents, my brothers, my sister, and I did everything ourselves. We mowed, we scrubbed, we unclogged drains, you name it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that summer. It was the morning of July 6th, a nightmare for anyone who had to clean up after a busy holiday weekend. I was 14, and my dad told me to take care of the bathhouses. "Start with the front one," he said. No problem, I had done it 100 times before. To my surprise, the front bathhouse wasn't too bad. A few scattered beer bottles, some toilet paper on the ground. Nothing unexpected after a weekend of partying and fireworks. Then I moved on to the back one. The second I opened the men's side door, I knew something was wrong. The smell hit me like a punch to the face. Thick, sour, and suffocating. A disgusting mix of sewage, vomit, and something even worse. My stomach twisted. Something had died in there, or so I thought. I took a hesitant step inside, my shoes sticking to the grimy floor with a wet squelch. The air was heavy, thick with humidity that clung to my skin. And that's when I saw it. A streak of brown, chunky, and wet, stretching from the stalls across the floor all the way to the showers about 20 feet away. Diarrhea and puke. My eyes followed the trail, each step making my dread grow stronger. That's when I saw him, face down in the shower, completely still. A man covered head to toe in filth, poop, vomit, who knows what else. His body was limp and lifeless, tangled in the mess. I froze. Was he dead? My mind screamed at me to do something, but I was paralyzed. The stench, the sight, I couldn't process it. I felt my stomach lurch, and for a horrifying second, I thought I was about to add to the mess. But I had to know. Was he alive? I didn't want to get any closer, but I had to do something. My hands trembled as I gripped the wooden handle of the broom I'd been carrying. Stretching my arm as far as it would go, I poked his leg. Nothing. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I poked again, harder this time. He moved. Relief flooded me for half a second before pure terror took over. Nope, nope, nope. I was not dealing with this at 14. I suddenly realized that my dad did not pay me nearly enough to handle something like this. I dropped the broom and bolted, sprinting out of that bathhouse like my life depended on it, because in that moment, it felt like it did. I ran straight to my mom, gasping, shaking, on the verge of tears, and told her everything. She didn't even pause. "Go get your father." I don't know what Dad said when he saw the mess. I don't know what went through his head when he saw the man-shaped disaster lying in that shower. All I know is that he was the one who had to deal with it, not me. And to this day, I can't step into a public restroom without that smell coming back to haunt me. And if you ever ask me to go camping, absolutely not. Not after that. A few years back, a friend of mine from Wisconsin and I thought we had found the perfect camping spot in northern Arizona. I think it was called Pine Hollow Campground. It was a large group site designed for about 100 campers. But when we arrived, we noticed that both the individual and group campsites were closed for the season. That meant no fees, no water, and no trash service. We figured it would be quiet and secluded, just what we were looking for. In the big parking lot for the group site, we spotted a trailer, an ATV, a generator, and a pickup truck. But we weren't there to socialize or bother anyone, so I drove as far to the other end of the lot as possible. We set up our sleeping bags and cots near some picnic tables and trees, making sure we were mostly hidden, except for my car, which was still visible. After a while, we decided to walk over to a nearby overlook to catch the sunset. That's when a truck came speeding into the parking lot. It raced down toward where we were, then up to the trailer before finally stopping close by. Right away, I could tell something was off about the driver. He looked furious and determined. The guy stormed over to us, absolutely livid, and demanded that we leave immediately. I stayed calm and asked why, since the campground was closed and we weren't bothering anyone. That's when he snapped, claiming to be law enforcement and insisting that this was his campsite. I pushed back, asking to see his reservation, already knowing that the group sites were shut down for the season. He stammered, his response a mess, then doubled down, insisting it was his group spot and that we were trespassing. I told him we'd leave first thing in the morning. That's when he pulled out a badge and flashed a .40 caliber pistol before throwing my small backpack aside. I do carry a concealed weapon, but I didn't reach for it or mention it. Instead, I kept my focus on his face, which by now was way too close for comfort. My friend, who was standing a few feet away, later told me he noticed the guy repeatedly gripping his gun, though I hadn't caught that part. Probably for the best. My friend stepped in, trying to calm things down, and suggested we just pack up and go. He didn't want to stay there another second, and honestly, neither did I. He even talked me out of coming back late at night to mess with the guy's generator or flatten his tires, though I won't lie, I had plenty of ideas on the drive home. As we made our way back to Flagstaff, we talked over the whole situation. We both agreed that this guy was either a fake cop or a real officer with some serious personal issues. Once I got home, I called the local police department and confirmed that he actually was one of their officers. After some digging online, I found out he had been involved in a recent police shooting that had made the news. At the time, I thought the shooting was justified, but after this encounter, I felt like I needed to see more footage. I had a feeling he might have escalated that situation too. In the end, the police department did an internal review but found no wrongdoing on his part. In fact, he claimed that we were the aggressors and that we had threatened him with a club. For the record, I'm 64, and my friend was about the same age. Our weapons were nothing more than lightweight hiking poles. The investigation cleared him, but I can't shake the feeling that the department was covering for someone who shouldn't be wearing a badge. I still respect law enforcement as a whole, but I have zero respect for the ones who hide behind that badge and the system that protects them. I'll never forget how close things came that night to turning into something far worse. And I'll always be grateful to my buddy Mark for keeping me from making a decision I would have regretted. As for Officer David, I hope you get the help you need. We both walked away that day, but it easily could have gone a different way. We went on a camping trip near Mount Baker, expecting a peaceful and enjoyable getaway, just us and the great outdoors. But that day turned into a nightmare I still can't think about without my stomach twisting. Our 4-year-old son was with us, happily playing near our tent. One moment he was right there and the next he was gone, just gone. At first, I assumed he had wandered a few steps away, but as I looked around, he was nowhere in sight. My chest tightened and fear crashed over me. I called his name. Silence. My voice grew louder, more desperate. I ran to our SUV, yanked the door open, and yelled for him again. He wasn't inside. I slammed the door shut and kept running, searching every possible spot, shouting his name over and over. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. My mind spiraled through every worst-case scenario. Had someone taken him? Had he wandered too close to the cliffs? Every horrifying possibility flooded my thoughts as I tore through the campground. Minutes stretched into eternity. My throat burned from screaming, and I was on the verge of completely losing it, until my husband called out. I turned to see him standing by the SUV. Relief hit me so hard my legs nearly gave out, but it didn't last, because then I saw where he had found our son. Inside the SUV, the same SUV I had checked, he had been hiding beneath a pile of blankets. Couldn't believe it. I had closed the door with him still inside, on a scorching day well over 100 degrees. Realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My legs gave out as I rushed over, pulling him into my arms. I held him so tightly, afraid to let go, terrified by what could have happened. He was completely fine, but I wasn't. My mind was spinning, my hands shaking as I clung to him, trying to make sense of what had just happened. See, a few months earlier, I had taught him how to open and close the SUV's sliding door. He loved to play hide and seek, and that's exactly what he had done. In my panic, I had checked the car, but I hadn't noticed him hidden under the blankets. We packed up immediately. There was no way I could spend another night in that campsite. We left and booked a small cabin nearby. I couldn't even think about sleeping outside after that. I swear, a part of me left my body that day. Even now, I feel sick thinking about it. What if my husband hadn't found him? What if we hadn't checked again? In another version of events where that door had stayed closed, I don't even want to imagine it. I think every parent knows this fear, and I lived it. Maybe if you don't have kids, you won't truly understand how it feels, how your heart shatters into 1,000 tiny pieces in that kind of panic. We had just arrived at a place called Crescent Bay Campground, somewhere in Oregon. The first thing we did was stop by the bulletin board to check for any notices. That's when we spotted it, a missing person flyer. The man had been gone for quite some time, so we didn't think too much of it. According to the flyer, he had gone out on a stormy evening and never made it back. It also mentioned that he didn't know how to swim, which seemed like an eerie detail in hindsight. The following day, we decided to go kayaking on Clearwater Lake. The water was smooth, and we spent a good amount of time paddling around, soaking in the silence and tranquility. But as we started making our way back toward the shore, something felt off. A strange, sour odor drifted toward us. It was coming from the direction of the swimming area, which was marked off with floating buoys where families and kids usually played. At first, we figured it was just the lake, maybe some decaying plants or dead fish. But as we got closer, the smell became stronger, heavier. We paddled past the designated swimming zone, heading toward the spot where we had first entered the lake. And that's when we saw it. Under one of the buoys, something was caught. We drifted in, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. Then the realization hit like a gut punch. It was him, the missing man. His body had been trapped beneath the buoy, barely submerged beneath the surface. What made my skin crawl the most was the thought of all the children who had been splashing around just feet away, completely unaware of what was lurking below them. My blood turned ice cold. We rushed back to shore, paddling as fast as we could, and immediately called the authorities. They had been searching for him all this time, yet no one had thought to check so close to the swimming area. Police arrived and shut down the swimming zone. We packed up our things and decided to leave early. There was no way we could stay after that. But the unease didn't leave us, not that night. Before we left, something strange happened. Around our campsite, we kept hearing odd noises. A faint rustling, the sound of footsteps, maybe, and then the scurrying. Rats. We could hear them darting through the brush, moving unnervingly close to our tent. But the weirdest part? It didn't seem like they were just foraging. It felt like they were circling us, watching. Maybe it was just our nerves after what we found in the lake. Maybe it was exhaustion. But something about that night felt wrong, like we had stayed somewhere we weren't welcome, like something wanted us gone. I haven't gone back to Crescent Bay since, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. I was with a group of about 8 people, and we weren't in any kind of designated campsite. We always preferred to hike deep into the backcountry, as far from civilization as we could get. This trip was no different. We had set up camp in a remote area somewhere deep in the Cascades, roughly 9,500 feet up. It was around 9 or 10 at night, completely dark and eerily quiet. No wind, No rustling branches, just an unnatural stillness hanging over the forest. We were all sitting around the fire, feeling a good buzz from the whiskey we'd been passing around, when suddenly, a man stepped into the glow of the flames. I can still picture him clearly. He wasn't wearing a shirt. Even though the mountain air was freezing, it was cold enough that you could see every breath. His skin was smeared with dirt and grime, and he had a rifle slung over his shoulder. But the thing that unsettled us the most was his face. His expression was completely blank, like he wasn't really there. What truly terrified us, though, was how close he had gotten. We hadn't heard a single sound before he appeared. Not a footstep, not a snapped twig, nothing. He had somehow crept right up to our fire without making a sound. The whole group went completely still, frozen in place, not saying a word. We just stared at him, and he stared back, slowly scanning the campsite, his empty eyes moving from person to person. Then, without a sound, he took a few steps backward, fading into the darkness beyond the firelight. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. None of us went to sleep that night. We didn't feel safe. Instead, we stayed up in shifts, keeping the fire burning as brightly as possible. That's when we started to hear him again. Soft, nearly inaudible footsteps circling the camp. Now and then, we'd hear twigs snapping just beyond the light of the fire. Occasionally, we'd catch a brief flicker of movement in the darkness, like he was out there watching, waiting. He stayed there all night. At the first light of dawn, we packed up camp faster than we ever had before. Nobody spoke a word until we were far away, deep into our hike back. As soon as we had cell service, I reported everything to the rangers. But I don't know if they ever found him. That was the most terrifying night of my life. I've never gone back to that part of the mountains, and I never will. For about a decade, my family ran a campground, so staying out of the wild wasn't exactly an option. But after that night, I've never camped far from other people again. A few years back, when I was around 15 or 16, I went on a camping trip with two friends in the remote northern part of Wisconsin. The weather was perfect, about 72 degrees, sunny, and calm. This was before cell phones were common, so I used a payphone at the park station to call my mom and let her know we had arrived and set up our campsite. She warned me that the forecast mentioned some rough weather coming in later, but I didn't think much of it. A little wind didn't seem like a big deal, and tornadoes weren't really something that happened in that area. Fast forward a few hours. We had just come back from a hike when we noticed the sky getting darker. Out of nowhere, the wind started picking up, swirling in all directions. Suddenly, I heard a muffled voice over a megaphone. A park ranger's truck sped down the road toward our site, blaring a warning over a loudspeaker. There was a tornado warning. We grabbed our things and sprinted toward the nearest shelter, a bathhouse, where a few other campers had already gathered. The storm hit with an intensity I'd never seen before. Lightning flashed repeatedly. Hail the size of golf balls started pelting the ground, and the wind screamed through the trees so loudly that I thought the whole forest would rip apart. Inside the bathhouse, we huddled together, flinching every time a tree snapped and crashed to the ground. The thunder was so deafening it made my ears ring, and the building itself trembled like it could come apart at any moment. Felt like forever before the storm finally passed. When we cautiously unbolted the door and stepped outside, the sight was pure destruction. Trees had collapsed onto campers, tents were shredded and tangled in branches, and massive hailstones littered the ground, slowly melting in the freezing air. The temperature had dropped from the 70s to the 30s in just over an hour. With the roads completely blocked by fallen trees, we had no way to leave, so we spent the night in the bathhouse with the other campers. The park rangers brought in propane heaters and vented them through the shower exhaust fans to help keep us warm, but it was still an incredibly long and bitterly cold night. That tornado was the first to touch down in that area in nearly 100 years, and another wouldn't hit the same spot again for 2 more decades. By the time it was over, my tent was completely destroyed. It had been ripped away and later found shredded in the branches of a tree. My parents felt bad for me and surprised me with a brand new one, which I definitely didn't expect. Even so, that night remains the most terrifying experience of my camping life, and it's something I'll never forget. I grew up in Montana, but for some reason, we always seemed to go camping in Idaho. I was about 11 back then in the late 70s. Around 2 a.m., it was pitch dark, freezing, and we were deep in the mountains. I woke up shivering and decided to head to the car to warm up. Dragging my sleeping bag along, I climbed over my brother, accidentally waking him up in the process. Of course, he said he had to pee, but I figured he just didn't want to be left behind, as usual. We stepped out of the tent, and I noticed the sky was getting lighter. Instead of going back to sleep, I pointed toward the glow creeping over the ridge and said, "The sun's coming up, so I might as well stay awake." My brother, always the little outdoorsman, immediately corrected me, saying the sun didn't rise from that direction. Naturally, as the older sibling, I had to argue. Our back and forth woke our parents, and my dad stuck his head out of the tent. The moment he saw the deep red glow over the horizon, he knew exactly what it was: a wildfire. In a panic, we rushed to pack up as fast as possible. We didn't even bother to take the tent down properly. We just collapsed it and shoved everything into the back of our old 1974 Chevrolet station wagon. My dad drove as quickly as he dared along the winding dirt roads, constantly reassuring us that we were ahead of the fire. But as the smoke thickened and the steep drop-offs beside the road loomed without any guardrails, fear gripped me. It felt like we were running from something we had no chance of outrunning. Not long into our escape, a wildlife ranger's truck came speeding out from a side road, heading toward another campground. He flashed his lights at us, and my dad stopped. The ranger quickly told him the fire was spreading fast, and he was evacuating the area. He assured us we still had time, but that didn't calm my nerves. The smoke was growing thicker, and I didn't truly feel safe until we finally made it back home. To this day, whenever I see news footage of people fleeing wildfires, whether out west or up in Canada, that memory comes rushing back. A small part of my brain still panics, remembering how terrifying it was, especially that drive. It made me realize just how quickly things can spiral out of control, and how easily lives can be lost. A dew is basically a massive, fast-moving wall of air that can yank trees straight out of the ground and knock over small buildings. Imagine a roaring train made of wind tearing through the woods, shredding everything in its way. It might not seem too bad if you're sitting safely at home, but when you're deep in the forest, surrounded by towering trees that could crash down at any second, it's absolutely terrifying. But surprisingly, the storm itself wasn't even the most frightening part of that night. I had set up my tent inside a simple open shelter, a structure with a concrete base and a roof but no real walls. I thought it would give me a bit more protection from flying debris and falling branches. I was wrong. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't the only one looking for safety from the storm. As the wind screamed through the forest, bending trees and sending leaves whipping through the air like sharp shards, I heard something. At first, I figured it was just the storm playing tricks on my ears. But then I felt a heavy presence and then a steady tapping sound. Claws clicking against the concrete just outside my tent. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was a black bear, and not just any black bear. This one was frantic and furious. I'd had bears near my tent before, and usually you can scare them off with some loud yelling, a few claps, or even just making your presence known. But this one wasn't leaving. The storm had sent it into a panic, and now it was stuck in the same shelter as me, pacing around my tent in a mix of fear and aggression. I could hear it moving back and forth, huffing and grunting, trying to figure out what to do. Every few minutes, it would leave the shelter, only to return moments later, each time sounding more on edge. The tapping sound continued, its claws clicking against the concrete as it circled me over and over. Sometimes the sound would fade, then suddenly grow louder again, like it was running in circles. The pattern was maddening, and with the wind outside howling like some kind of wild spirit and trees crashing in the distance, I felt completely, utterly trapped. I didn't move, I barely breathed. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the bear could hear it. My only comfort was the hunting knife I always carried. Slowly, with trembling hands, I pulled it out and taped it to my hand. I wasn't taking any risks. If that bear decided to come through the thin fabric of my tent, I wasn't going to just sit there and let it happen. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Time became meaningless as I sat there gripping that knife with my sweaty, taped-up hand, waiting, listening. Eventually, mercifully, the storm started to calm. The wind eased, and finally, the bear wandered off, probably just as drained and disoriented as I was. But I still didn't move. Not until the first hints of daylight crept through the trees. When I finally crawled out of the tent, I saw the tracks circling the shelter. Deep grooves left by claws that had been far too close for comfort. That night was, without a doubt, one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. And to this day, it's the only time I've ever come across a black bear that refused to back down. Usually, they're all just big cowards, but this one wasn't budging. And in that moment, I honestly didn't know if I was going to make it out alive. I was about 13 when it happened. A friend and I were backpacking through Tunisia, hitchhiking and exploring as we went. One evening, we decided to set up camp on the outskirts of a small town. Not too far from the main road, but far enough that we wouldn't be noticed by passing vehicles or pedestrians. The area was dense with shrubs and trees, with no visible paths, so we assumed it would be a peaceful and hidden spot. Sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of rustling. At first, I thought it was an animal, so I peered into the darkness, trying to catch sight of whatever might be making the noise. But within moments, the sound grew louder. My pulse quickened as I sat up, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, from the undergrowth, I saw him. An elderly man crawling toward us, his movements slow and deliberate. I was completely shocked. This was the last place I expected to see another person, especially one creeping through the bushes in the dead of night. There was absolutely no reason for anyone to be there. It didn't take long to realize that he was approaching us on purpose. Maybe he wanted to steal from us, or maybe his intentions were worse. I shook my friend awake and started shouting at the man, demanding to know what he was doing. He immediately stood up and began speaking quickly in a language I didn't understand. It sounded mostly like he was apologizing. He didn't try to come closer. He simply turned around and disappeared back into the night. We were too startled and exhausted to do much of anything, so we just lay back down, adrenaline still racing through our bodies. Looking back, staying put was probably a reckless decision. But at that age, we didn't think much about the dangers. We never found out what the man truly wanted, but that night made us realize just how exposed we really were.